Welcome back to the character component of the Samurai 7 Retrospective. Having discussed the seven samurai, it's time we discuss some non-samurai characters. And to start this process, I thought it fitting to start with the man at the head of the process. That, of course, is Ukyo. Now, Ukyo serves as the main antagonist of the series, although only does so after the sort of halfway point of the story, and he's also a neat commentary/examination on historical perspectives and on what makes a good ruler. He is simultaneously extremely narcissistic, spoiled, and selfish, a borderline sociopath in fact, but he's also incredibly cunning, charismatic, intelligent, and borderline competent. He's not crazy, but instead dangerously sane, and extremely well written as a man who will either stab you in the back or give you a nice pat on the back. You can't tell which he's gonna do, but he knows which one he's gonna do, and there's always a sort of method to his madness. Getting a tad personal for a moment, in the OAM annuals of Antagonist, he's probably the most intriguing in my eyes, at least so far, and one of my favorites. He's much more cunning than Big Al, much more pragmatic than Knives, and much more defined and fleshed out than Proxy 1. I mean, let's be honest, that guy was in like 5 minutes of footage. Anyways, as of now, he will hold the unofficial title of Best Bad, which is something I find even more impressive considering that Ukyo is an anime original character. Quite impressive, and one of the best original additions that the writers made to this version of the tale. Getting back to Ukyo's character, let's see what got him to this point, and why he's such an excellent exercise in writing. To begin, we will begin where we always do, with his context. Now, Ukyo is introduced in episode 1, as the son of the city ruler Amaro. Now, he initially just comes off as a spoiled brat, the son of the local magistrate who just wants to get what he wants at all times. In episode 2, that is Kiara, whom he proceeds to kidnap. This of course is foiled by the samurai, but Ukyo remains resolute in spite of initially being shaken up for a bit. At this point, most of us, including myself, will probably just see this guy as a 2-bit villain who will come up every now and again to make appearances and annoy us, but not really do much from that point on. Doesn't really strike us as the kind of guy to have much of an impact on the series. This of course is very wrong, and Ukyo eventually proves so. For now, though, he just kind of relaxes at home, though he does kill the Imperial Ambassador, though this isn't revealed until much later, and uses this as an excuse to round up the samurai of the city. This of course fleshes out our main protagonists, and allows him to catch up with them and Kiara for a fleeting moment in the caves. Though of course he's forced back once everyone reaches these caves, and once again just kinda goes home and does his own thing for a bit. It is here though that we start to see the inner workings of his mind, and his Machiavellian processes. The first hint at this is when he decides to start a system of village protection emulating the Kana model by paying the unemployed samurai of the city to protect the various villages surrounding the city. This earns him a lot of respect and support from both some samurai and some peasants, and this cues us into the fact that Ukyo has plans, and maybe he is gonna actually do something. When Kanbei turns himself into the capital as part of his ploy to execute the current emperor, Ukyo of course wants to see this, and thus too ventures to the capital. It is here, though, that Ukyo gets his lucky break, and evolves from fringe menace to best bad. Here in the capital, 2 important things about Ukyo are revealed. 1. He is a clone of the current emperor, raised in a peasant village, and later adopted by Amaro as his own. And 2. He's extremely skilled and knowledgeable in both politics and court politics especially. These 2 things allow Ukyo to pass the tests assigned to him by the emperor, and thus be appointed to succeed the current emperor. He then fast forwards this process by pulling the plug on him. I mean, look at this smile. He's excited to become a leader. Anyways, now as the emperor, Ukyo goes about consolidating his power and reshaping the political order. A bit, more on that later. He starts by cementing his support among the unemployed samurai and the peasants by continuing to pay them to protect villages. This of course requires something to protect from, so he instructs the bandits to continue collecting tribute, or at least attempting to, and enjoys their suffering. It is revealed that he hates mechanical samurai due to having experienced their aggressiveness in the past as a peasant. Now at the peak of his prowess and prestige, Ukyo seeks to finalize his reign by destroying the one possible source of resistance to it, that being Kana village. This of course results in the capital's attack on it, and ultimately his death. While the assault by the capital initially seems to go very well, he does underestimate the samurai, who of course get in to the capital, destroy the capital, and ultimately corner him. Although, like all smart rulers, he of course has several body doubles in place and an escape plan, although again underestimating the samurai, this too is foiled, and he is cleaved by Kanbei and gets punched by Kikuchiyo so he can get thrown into a canyon and die somewhere in its dirt. This of course is after he gets one last lunge at Kiara though, again being denied at the very end. With Ukyo's story explained, let's examine his character and why I think he's well written. Now, he's fascinating as he's probably the most realistic and dangerous kind of villain we've seen on this channel so far, the calculating and pragmatic kind. Someone who is criminally sane. While he is a narcissist and kinda goes a little mad with power, he's never unrealistic or impractical. Everything is at least somewhat calculated and serves some sort of purpose. He has his finger on the pulse of the people, and uses this to exercise a masterclass in manipulation and realpolitik. He realizes the power and societal structures present around him, and instead of trying to tear them down or greatly reshape them in his own image, he just kind of tweaks them a little bit to advance his own power as much as possible. We can see this in how he consolidates his position upon ascending to it. A less cunning leader would probably have simply just executed the bandits because, he hates them, but Ukyo instead punishes them by sending them on suicide missions, knowing that they will be beaten by the samurai he has hired to guard the villages. Now again, this might seem a tad silly, as he's essentially paying two opposing armies both loyal to him to fight each other to the possible death, but it does make sense upon further examination. This is brilliant because by playing off the different factions against each other, he weakens and destroys the ones he hates, the bandits, trains up the ones he doesn't mind, his samurai, and furthers his position to those who like him, the now employed samurai, and maybe some of the peasants who see him as slightly better than the last guy. This also reduces the chances of either side rebelling against him, as he has not gotten rid of the old machinery and social systems present in the old regime, but instead simply placed himself on top of them in order to keep everything running as smoothly as possible. He has simply put everything under new management, but hasn't actually changed anything being managed. As such, he can hit the ground running and pursue his goals relatively quickly. Another example of his cunning is the employment of his clone brothers. While they are clones of the same person and thus could try to usurp him, Ukyo intrinsically understands that they are too weak to do so, both physically and mentally. Thus, instead of trying to destroy a possible vestigial threat from the previous administration, he instead utilizes them as body doubles, providing a good service to him and either co-opting or strong-arming possible contenders or pretenders to the throne to support his regime. Ukyo, above all, knows that there's no need to reinvent the wheel, and thus he never bothers doing so. He knows that all he has to do to consolidate himself and his position of power is be at least somewhat popular, show a modicum of generosity, weaken any possible contenders at least a little bit, and then just blame all the issues present on the previous administration. We can see this in his various acts of goodwill and other actions he takes. Now, I don't think Ukyo hates or even looks down on the peasants, as he used to be one of them, but at the same time, I don't buy into him being a sort of man of the people. He does understand them, though, and he uses various generous acts, which, let's be honest, to someone as rich as him doesn't really cost him anything, to win the peasants' support. He knows that he can simply buy his way out of certain issues, and sometimes that is the most practical thing to do. He does this when he gives rice to the urban poor, and when he releases the women held captive by the last emperor, and even grants Kanbei clemency. He is aware that he himself isn't very physically powerful, but he has a great many deal of resources which enable him to exercise power over others via the societal systems he now lords over. He therefore knows that he must retain the loyalty of others in order to retain their power, and that the systems present allow him the best chance at doing so. Therefore, even though he isn't a very generous or personable person at his core, he understands the need to look so and be so for, social purposes and ultimately serving himself. Again, none of this is really an issue for him because he does seem at least a little self-aware and he is very cunning, very knowledgeable on how to utilize systems like this. This doesn't necessarily scratch who he is as a person, though. As a person, Ukyo is also a bit interesting, although admittedly a tad shallow. He's an extremely competent and unconcerned ruler who simultaneously has some lingering fears, especially of mechanical samurai, and dislikes, again, especially of mechanical samurai, and he knows the need to act the way the peasants think he should. That is to say, he needs to know how to feign concern and compassion. He is proof that a good listener is often more in touch and more dangerous than a good talker. He, for the longest time, seems uninterested in ruling, in the people, and in anything other than himself. Thus, he gives us the image that he would be a horrible ruler, someone who is incompetent. He leads us in to believe the idea that he would be nothing more than a playboy who is incapable of ruling over an empire because he would be distracted by the riches provided for it. However, this is probably the exact opposite of the truth. Again, he's very in touch with the systems present and how to get the most out of them. As such, he knows how and when to turn on his natural charisma to further his own advances, and, if that doesn't work, he also knows the power of the threat of force and that it can often be more effective than the force itself. He knows how to win others over as efficiently as possible, and he does so via a coercive mix of both rewards and threats. This isn't necessarily to say he's interested in ruling or that he's a, quote, good person, but that he knows how to rule over others as efficiently as possible in order to maximize how much time and how many resources he can devote to himself. Again, he is competent to further his own selfish desires. He does the right thing for the wrong reasons. Over the years, he's learned to become very good at this, and utilizes his words above all else to do so. In spite of words being his main outlet, though, Ukyo uses them as a tool, and this proves that he's an extremely pragmatic person. He doesn't hype himself or the country up much when he takes power, so much as he uses words to creep into the minds and hearts of those around him. Notice how many times he, as either a powerful magistrate or emperor, bows to others who are no doubt somewhere very far beneath him on the social ladder power ranking. He does this because he realizes that his own personal prestige doesn't provide too much in terms of physical force, and thus should be used as pragmatically as possible to win the physical support of others. What difference does bowing to someone really make to a guy like Ukyo when, in return for doing something that realistically costs him nothing, he wins the ample support and admiration of those under him, who he can realistically use and exploit? He's added practical value to his status by voluntarily lowering himself from it on occasion, and therefore seeming much more sympathetic or likable to those under him. This practical side in turn allows Ukyo to utilize his massive empire very efficiently, to pursue whatever he would like to do so, and this leads us to ask, is Ukyo a good ruler? Now, while this question may seem a bit irrelevant, because it is, Samurai 7 is based on 7 Samurai, which is a period piece. And this got me thinking as to whether or not Ukyo would be considered a good ruler if he was a real historical figure. I mean, think about it. If we look at his rule objectively, he consolidated his realm, he protected the peasants, he won favor among many of the poor and warrior classes, and he proved to be great at court politics. Had he been a real guy and governed for, say, I don't know, like 20 years, he would probably be remembered as a competent, maybe even decent ruler. Again, I bring this up not to say he's a good guy, he's definitely not, but instead to point out that he is competent, and that competent government does tend to benefit those under it. It means that someone can do the right things, even if for the wrong reasons. And it allows us to see how big-brained he can be when it comes to governing over those under him, even if he is still a scumbag. Again, in spite of all of the seeming praise I've given this man, I don't think he's a good person though. He's simply an interesting political portrait of what realpolitik and manipulation can look like when utilized to its extreme in an environment without many checks or balances on said person. He is arrogant and selfish, and above all, highly manipulative. He is a borderline sociopath. I mean, just look at how he smiles when he assumes power. He's smiling because he knows he can get away with this, and that because of what he's about to acquire, he's going to be able to get away with a lot more. I mean, just know, other than primal fear or rage or something of the like, Ukyo doesn't really emote much throughout the series. Notice how he doesn't really have any personable moments with anyone. He doesn't really have any moments with Tessai where the two have a heart-to-heart. He never really seems close to his dad. He doesn't seem close to anyone other than himself. Now, someone might say, oh, he loves Kiara, but again, I don't think that's true. I think he just sees her as a possession more than a person. All this backs up his psychopathy. But his psychopathy is very well suited to someone in a political or business scene. He's a real Sigma male, if you will, and he's always at that grind set, utilizing his resources as best as he can to focus in on himself. And yes, while he is good at feigning concern, he doesn't actually seem to exercise any of this and seems unbothered by his lack of actual human connection. I mean, just look at how he does his prime minister here. This is not the action of a man who actually cares about any human around him. He literally uses him as a meat shield. Again, other than a fear of death, smug arrogance, or some kind of primal fears that we see emote due to his hatred of mechanical samurai, he doesn't really have any human moments. Never a single personable scene. I mean, the man sent a hit squad after his own dad, after all. A man who, while also scummy, did genuinely adopt him and try his best to raise him, in his own weird way. And again, although Ukyo excels at feigning concern, and at exploiting and utilizing the systems he has at his disposal efficiently, he still wants more, and cannot handle not getting it, even though at this point he's more powerful than any other character here in terms of, like, political clout. He cannot take no, though, and, as someone on that grind set, figures that he needs to have what he needs to have in order to focus in on himself as best as possible. As such, he goes on a revenge quest, and, he single-handedly destroys himself by embarking on said quest because he got rejected by a girl. And, while it may seem like I'm kind of rushing this flaws paragraph, it's for good reason. While there's a lot to analyze in terms of his actions and political theories and how he manipulates everyone around him, when it comes to Ukyo as a person, while he does steal every scene he's in, there isn't much to him, substance-wise. And that's one of the reasons I find him so interesting and such a good exercise in writing. His lack of personable substance, his lack of humanity, really shows us the dangers of focusing exclusively on oneself and focusing solely on acquisition of things. He's an excellent example of someone that you don't want to be like, and, if you are, you might want to question your ways a little bit. Therefore, while there is a lot to analyze in terms of Ukyo's actions and political theories, and he's always a great scene stealer, I will say he's quite entertaining, he doesn't really have much character. Like most Sigma males, and even his literal name, an antiquated term which roughly translates to floating, fleeting, and/or transient, he is simply an empty man who spends the ample time given to him ultimately pursuing pointless tasks which, even when accomplished, don't really do much in the long term. While his surface level accomplishments are great, becoming emperor and leading over a great mass of people, he throws it all away due to his selfishness, and in the end, accomplishes nothing of any real value.